everybody. Thank you for coming and thank you for having me. I'm super excited to get to geek out on CSS a little bit with all of you. So I am Brenda Marie NYC. I live here. I can never move because this is my Twitter handle now. I am a designer at Thoughtbot, and we're a software consultancy. We do a lot of custom web applications. So I get to work on a lot of different websites, and a lot of them we're building layouts. So designers at Thoughtbot also do the front-end implementation. So I've gotten a lot of opportunity to build layouts, which is why I've gotten really excited about Grid, and I want to share that with you. But I kind of want to get a feel of the room of who codes here. Everybody's coding, yes. All right, and so who is using CSS Grid, just playing around with it at least? Awesome, awesome. Who has shipped Grid in like a production? Oh, you're all gonna want to do it by the end of today. And Flexbox, how does everybody feel about Flexbox? Everybody's using Flexbox? Okay, awesome. Yeah, so again, that's my goal, is that by the end of this talk, you're gonna be comfortable and excited and want to use this specification. So right off the bat, I want to get something out of the way, which is I want to talk about why this is ready to use today. But I kind of want to go over this graph, which is an experience I have a lot when I come to conferences and see talks. And you kind of like go into a talk, and you're like, that sounds interesting, this new specification. And as the talk continues, you hear more about it. You're getting really excited. You're starting to think about how you're going to use it on your current project. And then there's this point, often right towards the end, where browser compatibility is mentioned. And it's always something like, well, maybe in 5 years. And this is especially true with CSS. We've been burned by this a lot before. It's like, come on, like, when can we have nice things? Like, we just want to like use the nice things. So Grid is nice. I'm going to tell you how you can use it right now. I've been using it for a year and a half. Like, even before it shipped, I was like using it. So why is it better, though? Like, I want to give you the confidence, the background, so that you know why this is ready to go now. The biggest reason is that it was developed behind feature flags instead of vendor prefixes, which is like the Flexbox mess that we got, right? So Flexbox was being iterated upon and improved upon throughout all the browsers over years through vendor prefixes, so we had access to it and we were using it in production, and we created this big mess for ourselves, right? I mean, it's not our fault. Feature flags, so Grid has been worked on for years, but behind feature flags, which you can only enable as a user in your browser if you go to your settings and enable feature flags. So we haven't been able to use it in production until it was ready to go. So like if we look at a year and a half ago, January 27, 2017, Grid shipped in March of 2017 in Chrome, Safari, and Firefox, all within like 2 weeks. CSS nerds have never been more excited. And so we can see in Can I Use that a year and a half ago, this was at 5.9%. We'll get to what that little lime green over in the edge means. But it wasn't in any browser, but we go straight from red to green because in red, we've got everything behind a feature flag. And so today, CSS Grid is at 87.4% globally, and we've got green all over the place. So I'm still going to tell you how to write a fallback that will cover browsers that don't support Grid, but at this point, depending on what your project is and who your audience is and your analytics, you might not need to write a fallback. YOLO. So our favorite exception, IE. So I said that Grid was not developed under a vendor prefix. That's almost true. The original version of Grid was actually developed by Microsoft for, I think, Internet Explorer 10, like a long time ago. And so it is prefixed with the -ms, but you should never see another prefix in front of any grid property, because it was never developed that way. And so this version of grid, they ended up abandoning, but it was kind of the start of what we have today. So there are some things that work and some things that don't in the prefix. It's just an early, not fully baked version of grid. Okay, but remember I told you it was all gonna be okay? Like, I don't want you to worry about that, because I'm gonna show you that you don't even need to worry about that. And what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go through like the step-by-step guide to writing CSS Grid with a fallback. And then I'm just gonna show you some examples of some of the client work I've done and side projects I've done using Grid to kind of hopefully get you inspired. Step 1, identify a good use case. Somebody came up and asked me this right before I came on the talk, but like I hear this a lot, is like, okay, well, is this replacing Flexbox? Like, do we need Flexbox anymore? Who's gonna win? What's the better like specification? And so the answer is basically it depends on what you're trying to solve. They're both tools to use in your tool set, and they're different. So Flexbox is great for laying out items in one direction in rows or columns, right? But we've been faking this. We faked this with floats for years. Then we faked it better with Flexbox. We're trying to make a grid when we do this type of layout, right? But that's not really what this is made for. We get into things like this as soon as something is not in an unexpected length, or we want things to fit. How do we do this without, like right now, we could do absolute positioning, but then everything is taken out of the flow of the page. And we have to be like super specific and know all the factors, right? But Grid allows us to lay out elements in 2 directions, rows and columns. It also allows for content to flow around it. It also does a lot of calculations for us that we've been having to hard code. So this is probably like the first model you might think of in your head, because this looks like almost every grid framework like has something like this on their homepage, right? Except for it's usually in 12 columns. But like in order to understand the grid specification, because it works a little differently than the grid frameworks we're used to, don't think about it like this. Instead, think about it like lines. And you have elements that span lines, either column lines or row lines. And you start at 1 in the top left corner for each column and rows. So the answer to step 1, identify a good use case, is like when normally reaching for a layout property like Flexbox, floats, or positioning, consider grids. This is kind of what I started to do last year. Let's see, maybe this would solve my problem, and I'd like take it to a point and see if it would work. A lot of times it worked really quickly and much better, and that's what got me excited. So I have an example side project that I worked on, which is a good use case for grids. So this is a simple, let's see if it's playing. Yep, so this is just a little like page that hooks into the Foursquare API. You enter something, a place, and then it provides results as images from Foursquare of food. So the idea is to like inspire you by looking at pictures of food instead of like names of restaurants, a list of names. So, I mean, this is like a total perfect grid, right? I've got images. In this case, they're all the same height and width. This is going to play. Let me go back. Maybe not. I mean, you got the picture, right? We've got a grid of like images. We all have to do this a million times all over the place. Cool. So I'm going to write my grid code to make that grid of images happen. So a grid works a lot like Flexbox, where you have a parent element and you say things on the parent element. In this case, it's the unordered list, the UL search results. And then it affects all of its direct descendants, all the list items that our search results result. You tell it what to do with them. So This is what I've got simplified is basically an unordered list with a bunch of list items inside, and then there's an image inside of those. And here's the CSS, and this is literally all the CSS that was needed to complete that layout that was fully responsive and actually like changed the amount of items that were on each row, depending on your browser width. So to look at this, we've got on the parent element search results, display grid, grid gap 10 pixels. So this is going to be the space in between elements, but this doesn't affect the elements on the outside. So you can have full width grids that still have space in between items on the inside, which is something we've struggled with grid frameworks for a long time. Like you don't have to worry about that one on the edge having the margin when you don't want it to, you know? But in this case, I wanted to have that same margin, so I just added some padding to the same thing. That's the same as the grid gap, so it's even. And then the exciting part is I probably have like 3 examples with this exact code. I probably use this line of code more than any line of code in the past year. Grid template columns, so I'm just saying what I want the grid to do with the columns. Before I get to the repeat, we'll look at autofit, min-max 320 pixels, 1FR. Like, this is a lot of new CSS words, right? So, but basically what this is saying is, hey, browser, I want you to take all the things, all the children and search results. I want them to be at minimum 320 pixels wide. Don't make them smaller than that. But if they can be bigger, just make them fit evenly across however many you can. Auto-fit it, and then repeat that as many times as you need to, right? So I'm letting the browser do this math for me that I'm usually doing within media queries and like widths, right? Nope. My clicker is not working. I might have to like use the space bar. Cool, so that was super easy. That could be all I need to do if I'm not worried about a fallback. But I can fall back gracefully with pure CSS, no JavaScript, nothing else, by using a feature query. How many people here do you know about feature queries? Feature queries are your friends. So with Grid, they're like a perfect complement to each other. The technique is to just wrap your grid code in a feature query, and the feature query works like a media query where it's, instead of like checking the viewport width, it's checking to see if the browser understands this CSS property. That's its parameter. So saying, hey, at supports, do you support display grid browser? If you do, then do this code. If a browser understands feature queries but doesn't understand display grid, it's not going to run that code. Also, if a browser doesn't understand feature queries, it's not going to run that code because it doesn't understand what's going on. So that's what makes it a really solid fallback. At supports, every browser that supports Grid supports feature queries, which is why it makes it really safe. But the way you need to write this to make it so that it's a good fallback is to make sure you do it in the right order. So here I've written my flexbox fallback, which is like a typical thing. I think like we probably have all done display flex, flex wrap, so it wraps around in a grid. And then I'm doing some math to make the 10 pixel gap, but like on the outside, and I'm doing 5 pixels, but then I'm doing some calc, and then I'm doing percentages and media, you know, like, and then worrying about the margins. Like, this is like the simple version of the stuff that we keep having to do, right? So if I've got my fallback, I want to put that code first, my fallback. And I chose to do flexbox here, but I could have done floats. I could do anything I want to do to cover more browsers. So I've got my fallback first, and then I have my grid code in a feature query afterwards. And this is, every browser is going to be cool with this, because like if Internet Explorer doesn't understand display grid, it's gonna just do the flexbox first and skip everything underneath. So this is using the cascade in the way it was meant to be. Like latest version of Chrome is gonna do the flexbox first and then say, oh, cool, I know this grid stuff, and then just overwrite it. And then, like, this is the close-up of all the styling I had to do on the child, the search results result. Basically, just wanted to point out at the bottom, I just have to undo all of the like stuff I had to do for my fallback with a margin 0 and a width auto, because I don't have to do anything for grid for the child. It just like does it all for me. And just altogether, this is probably not super legible, but I wanted to just show the length of code this took to do this. It's really not that much. Like, I've gotten a lot of questions about why not just stick with the fallback if you can't do something full out, but I believe in pushing our language forward and our technology forward. This is going to be the standard. Grid is going to be the standard if it isn't already very, very soon. So might as well start using it now. Also, I mean, this example is has a lot of parity between what the fallback and the grid looks like, but it doesn't have to. Like, people won't know if it works okay and it doesn't look exactly the same. I think a lot of times we get stuck in like exactness and pixel perfection and can spend a lot of time on that, and that's not always the biggest problem that needs to be solved. But that's another talk. Cool, so things to take away: order matters. Fallback first is the default, and then grid code last, so it can override the default styles. The only hiccups I've come across since I've been doing this is auto-prefixer, which is awesome, but I kind of don't want to auto-prefix MS Grid, right? Like I said there was that like MS prefixing. Don't really want that to happen here because I just want my fallback to take care of it. I don't want to worry about the differences between the like Internet Explorer specification of 10 years ago, maybe like 7 years ago. So just make sure that it's disabled in your auto-prefixer. This is the default now for auto-prefixer 7 and greater, which I think came out last June. So if you're running a newer version of auto-prefixer, you shouldn't have to worry about it. But there's a config for, depending on what your stack is, where you can configure that and just set grid to false. The other thing that I've come across is that some syntax is not supported in SAS until a later version, which I think is also around June last year, version 3.5. And I work on a lot of Ruby on Rails projects, and SAS Rails is still only running like 3.1. And I don't think they're going to update this now because SAS has talked about deprecating their SAS Ruby. So it doesn't matter that much because it'll still work. It did break my entire test suite, though, which was the problem, is I didn't understand why the CSS broke all the tests. But it was just because it didn't understand the syntax. So there are some, I just had to like, it was the repeat syntax that it really didn't like. So I just sometimes would just declare 1FR, 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 1FR instead of like repeat for 1FR to get around things like that. Ship it. That was it. I mean, like seriously, in the past like year and a half that I've been playing around with this, those are the only like moments I've had. I really haven't had inconsistencies between browsers. The browsers played really well together to make this spec. In fact, one company made the Chrome and Safari version, so they're like really identical. So it's a really solid specification. Yeah. So in this end here, I just want to kind of go through some examples of how I've used this to hopefully inspire you. I'm not going over a lot of the like exact syntax of how things work. There are so many good resources out there for that. Wes talked about his course, and I have like a whole bunch of references at the end of my slides too to help you if you want to do that. I'm also going to tweet my slide link at the end, and I'll have the link displayed too, so you can grab that if you want to check out more resources. But I'll just kind of show you some of the stuff I've done. So, disclaimer, it's okay that when I look back at my old code, I sometimes say, whatever was I thinking, that means I'm still learning and growing. That's for me, because when I first put together this talk and I look back at my old code, I'm like, I can't show this on stage. Like, this is broken, but actually, it's a good example, so I want to show it on stage. This isn't that one yet, though. This is a more recent one, and it kind of ties into what the example I just gave. So some of the power of what we can do with Grid that we couldn't do before. I've created a grid that is responsive kind of based on content size rather than screen size. And so we don't have element queries yet. You know, the only way we can really like change the size of something based on a parameter in CSS is with the viewport, right, with a media query. But we can do this. I'll show an example of how we can do this. I'm going to go through what the examples are, and then I'm just going to go to my browser and show them all. Second, this is one of the first times I used CSS Grid. What can CSS do that it couldn't do before? Control placements around unknowns. And I've said that I don't need to use media queries, but maybe you do. In this case, I had a reason to use a media query with the grid, and I'll show that. Graceful degradation, like I said, who made the rules that all web pages must look the same in every browser? Let's try things and design things and make things that look really great to most of our users and look pretty good to everybody else, and they don't have to be like on parity with each other. And last, if we have time, this is my latest client, which we've got comps. This isn't normally how I work. It just kind of depends on the client, but I'm usually kind of designing and coding at the same time and implementing and iterating. But this is a time where I'm working from comps that a design agency did, and it's actually been really nice because a lot of times when that happens, you get things, and we weren't hired before when they did the design, so we weren't part of that process. There was no dev in part of that process. Thankfully, this was a good place. And they didn't do anything crazy, but still, I was able to look at the comps and at first be like, I don't know how to do this, and then I was like, oh no, I can do this with Grid. And it saved me a lot of heartache and struggle and like back and forth to try and get some design to work that I didn't know if it could work. So I'm going to go to here. So this is like the live version of Grub Gallery. And so just to kind of demonstrate what I was talking about before, the browser is basically saying, hey, can I fit 2 of these pictures across at 320 pixels, at least that big, with a gap of 10 in between? I can't. Oh, now I can. And then it will add another one. And so this is when I don't need media queries. It's just kind of figuring that out for me. And so I have the exact same code, basically. I said I use that one line all the time. I have that going here. And this is a client project for selling cars online. So we've got a grid of cars. But what made this powerful is I built this with Grid for this page, and then I realized that we used the same piece of code down here for related vehicles. And looking at this is taking up a different amount of space, right? Then like this is not nearly as wide of an area to cover as it was on the other page. But I didn't have to worry about how this would fit in here because it's responsive based on how many things can fit. So I didn't have to concern myself with media queries around making everything fit in here. So that was a really nice discovery, a gift from the grid gods. So this is a layout we've all seen a million times, which is article index, right? This isn't WordPress, but your WordPress index page, that's a list of articles. This is on a Ruby on Rails website, and there's a whole website for this legal company, and they just wanted to have a small blog as part of their organization. So in here, you see we've got list of articles, and then we have this little newsletter sign up. And this was like 2 years ago. They asked me, can you put this newsletter sign up in the middle of the list of articles? And my answer always is, well, I can, but I don't know if it's going to be worth the time to figure out how to do that. Because that's kind of can be hard, like inserting an element in the middle of a bunch of other things that are auto-generated, right? But then I thought, I wonder if I could do that with Grid. This was kind of the first thing I tried to do. And so I did. So what we have going on here is this, I'm telling this to place this one specific newsletter box here. So I'm going to go into the inspector. So I'm going to make this bigger too. I'm using Firefox. I think this is Firefox Nightly, but regular Firefox has these inspector tools that I'm going to show you. Firefox has awesome grid inspector tools. First thing, can you see that I've got broken code here? So this isn't even, this is crossed out. It's not even working. This is shipped. This is live. So I have on this, I've display grid. So if I click this little waffle, this is giving me the lines to show my grid. So I've definitely got a grid, and all I have on my parent element is display grid and grid gap 3M, but I'm not telling it anything else here. So how does it know what to do? I didn't even notice this was broken for a long time. And the reason why it's broken, I think I have this. Let me refresh this. I was playing around with it before, so I could show. Uh-oh. But basically, the reason it's broken is because I broke the test suite, like I said, in our Rails application with the repeat syntax. So I just removed the repeat word until the test suite worked and the web page worked. And I was like, OK, I did it. It's cool. But really, what I did was it didn't need it, and I didn't realize why. So let me go to this one. I have this other example where I can show you that I don't need internet for. So I made a Codepen of this to make it better. So I can take off this grid template columns. Because I made this better, it doesn't work. But did this reload? Oh, OK, this reloaded, and it's wrong. So I don't have the repeat syntax. The reason why this works, so if we look at the DOM, can you all see? Should I make this bigger? It doesn't want to be bigger. This is the biggest I can get. I've got my article list, and I've got all this list of articles. And then at the bottom of the DOM, I have this newsletter subscription box. But I'm placing it in the middle. And if I click on this and I'm doing that, I can see I've given it, and it's within a media query, its own direction. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to place you on grid column 3. I'm going to add, so I can go to layout here. Sometimes this just needs to wake up. And you can see it shows me the numbers on top, which is super great for troubleshooting. So I'm telling it to, and then also I love this. If I click this, it goes to the grid in your rules, so you know exactly how to get to your little element. That's so nice. But we were looking at this. So I'm saying here, I want this little newsletter to go to grid column 3, right? Row 2, and that's why it's placed here. And that is also why this layout works, even though it's broken, is because since I'm telling one thing where to be, the browser's like, oh, since you want something to be in this column, you must want all the other columns around it. You want at least 3 columns. I'm just going to fill in everything else for you. That's really forgiving. That's really nice. So the rest of this layout is the responsiveness is when I get to a certain point and this becomes 2 across, I've got this instead starting on grid column 3, so it's like one more down, and row 2, which again is why this works. It's like, oh, at this point, I see you want this here, so you want at least this many columns. I'm just going to work it out for you. That's really exciting and powerful. So one of the questions I got a lot, which I had not considered when I first did this layout, was accessibility of rearranging the DOM like this. Is this a good idea? I've asked accessibility experts too, because I think it's hard. It's a gray area we need to like really consider and probably even test to make sure things often are what they need to be. So I'm switching to Chrome just because it has like a brighter focus element. So what I mean is like if I tab, I'm tabbing through. It's tabbing through the DOM order, and it's skipping this newsletter box until I get to the end, and then it goes up there. So this could arguably be bad, or this could be fine, but it's something to consider when you're using the power of grid. The consensus around this is that this is fine, but it could get out of hand if there were too many things and it was too far of a jump. But this kind of makes sense, too, in when you're like tabbing through a page. All right. My favorite, this is my favorite. This is a prototype I made for a client of an article page. So this is what it looks like. It was ultimately decided we didn't go with this. But I really want to like, do you ever just want to build something because you want to build it, but you don't actually want to do it? Like, I was like, I'm going to build a blog on my website so I can use this layout, but like, I don't want to write any content. So this, I'm still like saving the moment for this layout, but I really like it. So the point of this layout was that I wanted to have an image that would be as wide as it needed to be. So this image is not stretched to be wider than its actual pixel height and width. But I wanted it to be the vertical height of the browser window. And then I wanted a header with the title and the author to be fixed to the bottom of the page. And I wanted it to like be flushed, is that right? Right, you know, so it's like kind of attached to the right. But then the tricky part was that I want the article underneath to be centered, okay? When I wrote this just with grid, and I was trying to figure out a fallback. Actually, I first tried to do this without doing grid, and I was doing some crazy div wrapping, absolute positioning, and like rearranging the DOM order of things, and it just, I just, especially this part, like getting this element and then this to, like how does that know where it needs to be to line up for the centered part underneath? Was like a really big challenge. So what I ended up doing here with grid, and this is on Codepen. My Codepen is the same as my Twitter, Brenda Marie MIC, if you want to look at this in some more examples. So I've got my grid, and it is, my columns are 1FR. I've got that min-max thing going on, so minimum auto, because I want it to be like, you know, like a mobile like article that it's just the width of whatever it needs to be, like when it gets small. And then I have 1FR on either side. And so this is the trick I kind of learned, is that if you put 1FR on either side, it's basically like a margin auto, but you can use that either side to put content in because it's a grid area, but it's flexible. So what I have going on here is the rows I'm declaring here 100 VH, so that top row is where I've got my image and my header, and then auto, so then like the whole article underneath is just like as long as it needs to be. So this is, I kind of wanted to keep my little grid, but lose my thing. Let's see if I can do that. And let's make it red and line numbers. Okay. So let's put this to the bottom so we can kind of see. So I've got my top area. I've got 3 columns. And so the FRs on either side, the FR unit, if it has nothing in it, it'll just collapse into nothing. So as this gets small, then it's just like one long length. And then there's a point where I like show the full image and the whole thing. The other thing I did here that I was like, why haven't I been doing this my whole life, is I've declared it with characters with, like units. Like why was I ever using M's for something like this? Oh, I think I put my little thing all the way down. Come back. So I'm saying the max width of that article is 73 characters, which is great for legibility, right? Why haven't I not been doing that my whole life? Why do we forget about the characters unit? Maybe it's just me. Maybe you've been using it your whole life, but I've forgotten about it. Cool. And so then the last example I wanted to show, I said, is my current project. This is where you see this subscription box. I'm using the same technique here that I used in the other one, which is it's centered, but there's I want content in one of those flexible areas in the end. So here I am in my product carousel. I'm going to make this something a little brighter. And oh no, I don't want footer list. Wrong guy. All right, so in here, I'm doing kind of the same thing, 1FR, min, max, auto, but I'm using like the standard container width on the website, which is 1,062 pixels, and then having 1FR on the other side. And so right now we're in the middle of building this, but the point is that everything, all the content that's above it, which is going to be new, is going to line up with this. Yet I still have this all the way over, like fleshed, like going off the page on the other side, but it's in a like flexible little area that collapses as it needs to, which is pretty cool. I have another grid on this page. This is a grid party. It's soon going to be all. And we're actually, and this is a client where I'm not writing fallback that much. Because it just wasn't needed in their analytics to support a browser that needed a fallback, so we're not writing a fallback. So this header, I've been waiting to do this because centered logo headers are weirdly complicated, right? Like, it seems like it would be easy, but to center something with this could be any length on either side. They could be totally different lengths. Usually involve some absolute positioning, and then you have to really know when you need to make a breakpoint so things don't overlap your logo. And it was one of those problems that was way harder than it should be. So this is another way to write grid, which I really like this way, which is I'm declaring areas in my grid by name, and then I'm telling an element to use that area and fill it. So in this case, I was able to, let's go to that place. So grid template areas, I'm saying, hey, main nav, logo, account nav. So that's basically what I've got here, main nav, logo, account nav. And then those elements, like on the class name for that, for the logo, which I have first in the DOM, which makes sense, right, to have my logo as the first thing loaded on the page. But visually, it has the proper hierarchy when it's in the center. I just declare on it grid area logo, and it places it in the middle. And so this is the one place where I did write a fallback, because I felt like, header, you know, like even if you're coming to this page and it's the navigation, like I want it to work for everybody, you know, the navigation. So, but if I turn off display grid here, this is my fallback. It's fine, you know, it's not the design. I probably could put a little space between Lola and products, but I decided we're on a deadline, so I decided not to do that right now. And since it's the fallback, I really just wanted to keep this usable so it doesn't look broken, and that if somebody comes to it, they could use it. But it's fine. It's just fine. So that's all the examples. All I've got, oh my gosh, 29 seconds. Like, this is pretty awesome. I'm feeling pretty good. Yeah, so ton of resources. Most everything I've learned from Jen Simmons and Rachel Andrew. They have so much material on Grid. Jen has this great YouTube series called Layout Land, which goes over more than just Grid, which I highly recommend you use. Some of the things I brushed over, what's the FR unit, autofill, autofit, min-max, how do those work? These are some links to that. Natalia has a talk and an article. She works at the Times here in New York City, from Bootstrap to CSS Grid. Like with a Sass mixin, that's like 11 lines long maybe. She wrote a way to overwrite Bootstrap anywhere it is. And so it uses Bootstrap as the fallback, and then you can write your Grid code and like put in this mixin, and then it like makes it the fallback, makes Bootstrap the fallback. So it's a way to like slowly deprecate your Grid framework and the old way you're doing things while like slowly building up the new things, which is really, really awesome. So I recommend you check that out. I talked about Grid and IE, like what's the difference? If you really, really want to know what the difference is, these are some good resource sources. From me, I have some Codepen examples, a few more than what I showed. And then I wrote an article for Heart Media that is basically the talk that I just give on the step-by-step guide, which kind of goes over that in more detail if you want to check that out. That's it. Thank you.